We're Group Sycamore. I'm Banks.
I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Christian.
And today we're doing our creative project. We decided to do a tier list of 9 linguistic topics, and we are ranking them based on what we think are the most interesting.
So to start, we're going to go over the term neuro-linguistic methods, which is one of the topics that we covered in our units. Specifically, it has to do with aphasia and stimulation testing and hemodynamic methods, as well as electrophysiological methods. And so all these methods kind of help us to study how brain damage can affect the language center and kind of what goes on in your brain when that happens. And that can lead us to conclusions about how to provide treatment for these people, and also just gives us further insight into how language processes in the brain.
I thought it was interesting when they were talking about, is it aphasia?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, before they even were doing any actual tests, they just recorded what kind of brain damage you got and then how it affected you. So,
We talked in other units about like the physiology, kind of like how we make the sounds with our mouths and our lips and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see and we've talked about obviously how you think through words, but it's interesting to combine those two and see like the biology behind the language. So as you're speaking, how that looks. I think I'd put this pretty high.
I think A or B.
Yeah, I really think this is an interesting topic. I don't know why, but I think it would be cool to be like part of the experiment where they like turn off that part of your brain to simulate aphasia.
That'd be crazy.
That would be so crazy. So I feel like it's like solid, like A tier for being like interesting to a non-linguistics major.
Throwing an A.
Yes.
All right, our next topic was wug, gonna, and frickin'. So this was one of the first assignments we did before we knew anything about linguistics. So it was really interesting how we were all able to use the same rules to say like what tense something was going to be or to modify the word. There were words that didn't exist, but we all still came to the same conclusion about them because there's some innate understanding of linguistic rules.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we couldn't have told you what they were, we still couldn't tell you why they exist. They just do, and all native English speakers just understand it.
Yeah, I feel like frickin' was a good example of like morphology and just kind of like our innate understanding where our brains process things by morphemes, and like just the fact that we kind of already understood that without knowing what it was like crazy.
It is cool that we all just kind of like come up with things on our own. Like they're not rules, you're not taught, and that was the point of the project was we've all just collectively assumed this, and so that has become the correct manner. Like we showed, like if you say it wrong, everyone will be like, oh no, that's wrong. But if you ask why, they'll say, that's just not how you do it. You do it this way.
Yeah, there was something like, if you say the big bad wolf, it sounds fine. But if you say the bad big wolf, you sound crazy.
Yeah.
And we couldn't tell you why. It's just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I also saw that it's hard to teach these things. So if you're learning English, you're not going to know this, and you're going to stick out if you use them wrong. But you just kind of have to fail a bunch of times to get it right. I think this one was pretty interesting. Just how people already knew about it.
Yeah. I feel like I put it solidly in like the B tier because like it's not like a technical linguistic method, but like it's like cool that it's like this innate learning.
I was also thinking B tier because while it is cool and it was really interesting the first time you read it and you're like, that's a real head scratcher. But it just isn't like super deep into it. Like we didn't, we weren't really able to come up with rules for why. It just kind of was like as a community, as a language speaking thing. Mm-hmm. So I'd say B.
We'll go with B.
All right. Next up we have language and perception. So language and perception also had to do with Worfianism. Is that how it's pronounced?
Worfianism?
Worfianism, yeah. So it's kind of like based on different languages, which have just, through being developed different systems for ideas, how that impacts the speakers of that language. So, for example, like the experiment with the Russian and English speakers in Russian, there's two different blues, like a dark blue and a light blue, but we would all just call it blue, if not, light blue or dark blue. But for Russian people, they can like make a distinction, like where on the blue spectrum it becomes this word or this word. And so they tested, they were like, hey, does that mean that people that speak Russian can distinguish between these two shades better? And what they found was it didn't really carry over between languages, so the Russian people weren't necessarily better at it than the English-speaking people. But within the group of Russian speakers, they found that it was easier for them when one of the blues was of this word in Russian and the other was of this word in Russian, as opposed to within those groups. So that was pretty cool to see.
I thought Whorfianism was pretty interesting because sometimes there were measurable differences, but then people would prescribe massive effects from them, and it doesn't really change your everyday life to have two shades of blue. It's just an anecdote, and it doesn't change your entire worldview like they kind of said it did.
Yeah, and there was like another couple of languages that had the same word for blue and green, which is like crazy to me because like they see those as two different colors the same way that we do, but it's still the same word, and they just like know what they mean.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, dang, okay.
Well, there's some I think it's like an Amazon language that has three colors, and it's like red, blue, and green, but they still see all the colors.
Right.
So it doesn't change the like cones in their eyes. Like we're all the same,
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this one was really interesting. I would say solid A, B tier. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I could do a low A, high B. I think either of those I'd be good with.
So maybe we'll stick it in the B tier for now. Make sure we have room.
Yeah, we can always come
Room
back.
spare. Yeah.
You can always
Reorganize.
rearrange at the end.
Put a high B.
Put it above.
Yeah. Perfect.
Right. Next up, we have animal languages. Yeah. So, animal languages talked about, first off, kind of what it means to have a language versus what it means to communicate. So a lot of different animals communicate with each other. For example, there was the monkeys, and they have a noise that they make if there's, I forget what the animals were, but if it was like if a leopard was coming or if something else was coming.
Yeah.
They could communicate those things, and they could, a hawk?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of them.
And they made different noises depending on that thing. And you think, oh, that's almost a language. Like they can make noises and they can differentiate between the noises.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that kind of set them out was the fact that those weren't like independent thoughts. Those were just the noises. So for example, you couldn't use leopard or hawk in another context, or the monkeys couldn't use that noise in another context. Like you could with language, which is broken up into, sentence structure and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting, actually, to see just kind of the rules that go into what is a language, and then just how different animals communicate but don't quite have a language. Just, there's minor differences.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that's cool.
Yeah, like how some of the rules were like you can make an infinite set of combinations based on like a finite set of rules, and the animals just don't have that like finite set of combinations to be created out of the finite set of rules, and like just the things that they communicate are more limited, but yet they're still able to like talk to each other kind of in a way.
Yeah, I thought it was cool with the bird songs, where like there were individual notes in each song and different combinations of them, but changing the notes out didn't change meaning. It only had meaning if it was the full song in the correct way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you couldn't change out a couple notes and it would slightly change the meaning. It was one big song means one meaning. So there's no rules there. It's just basically communication on language.
It was also cool that like each species has their own song, and they can tell what species it is depending on the song.
And there was the one bird that it has an infinite amount of song. So it was almost infinitely creative, except there was no grammar system. It had like the infinite amount of words that we have, but no grammar system to rearrange it.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. I'd say maybe A.
I was going to say
I
think
put
it's low
that
A.
in A.
Yeah. I'd say high A above neurolinguistics.
I
Above
think
neurolinguistics.
animals are definitely universally interesting.
Yeah.
I agree. It was also kind of like an odd one out for the other ones. Like basically all the rest was humans, and then this one was kind of a break from that. It was kind of just.
But it did
Well
teach
done.
you about human language too.
It did,
So it's
and that's what also is cool about it, is that looking at not humans taught you about human language.
Yeah.
So next up we've got phonetics, and phonetics is when we did the pink trombone, and it was all about how these sounds that we speak are actually created using a combination of your vocal cords and your tongue and your lips and your teeth. And so specifically in this unit, we learned about how sounds are made through like a combination of like the manners of place and the art and the manners of place and the places of manners and places of articulation. I totally know what I'm saying. And, we had that like phonetics chart with manners on one side and places on the other, and combined with voicing that created all the bilabial and the dental, just like the way that we produce these sounds.
I thought it was fun playing the pink trombone because, like, you would make the sound in real life and then you try to do it on the website, but it was actually really hard when you can just make the sound normally.
Yeah.
But reproducing it and knowing why the sound exists is kind of hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like when trying to make the B noise, I remember I was saying like B, and I was like trying to feel, because I was just trying to get to where it was on the website.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought that was fun. And then also it's like, I don't know if we really talked much about it, but what I was thinking about during it was different languages. Like sometimes it's harder for English speakers to roll R's because we don't have that in language. So there is some like difference between language speakers of the noises that they are comfortable making.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about how like your language doesn't really change your biology, but it kind of changes your vocal structure to be able to roll your R's, or like for some people it's hard to say L's or R's or whatever.
Yeah, I'm actually in like a child development class at the same time, and in there we were just learning about how babies are born with the ability to speak like any language, but the language that they're exposed to and the sounds that they make in that language get like so programmed into you that your body actually, your brain like lets go and forgets the muscle memory that would like allow us to like roll our R's, because we don't do that.
Yeah. I think phonetics was kind of interesting, but it was more scientific, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was kind of harder to approach for someone who doesn't know much about linguistics.
I feel like it is probably solidly like C tier.
I'd put it C.
I was gonna say I like it, but we've also started off with 2 A's and 2 B's, and we kind of got to fill out the spectrum. Like we said, we can go back and change at the end, but I agree it was more scientific, and like that was one of the ones that I was like kind of got to trudge through it, and you had to figure out the pink trombone.
Yeah.
You had to figure all that out. So I'd agree with that. I see.
All right, next we got sign language. So I was really interested because we talked about sign language in one of our units. And before taking this class, I thought, sign language is just a translation of English. They just directly translated every word in English to a sign. But that's not true at all. It is its own language entirely. You can translate it to English, but it was developed by deaf people who sometimes hadn't ever heard a spoken language. So it's as deep as any other spoken language. So that was kind of interesting. There's also a feature of it where spoken languages can only be linear. So you can only say one word at a time because you can physically only say one word. But in sign language, that's not a restriction. You can make multiple signs at once. And so it's a non-linear language, which was kind of interesting.
So like you said, some of them, like people that speak sign language, a lot of them like haven't ever heard speaking, but it is interesting that they have signs for A, B, C, all those things that are just sounds when you get down to it. I mean, I guess they're used for writing.
They have it for
but
writing.
They come from sounds. So that's kind of an interesting like closing the gap is the fact that they still write the same.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, like, you know, when I'm reading, I'm thinking in my head words. I'm curious what goes on in their head when they see those words. Is it pictures? Is it, you know, like, are they seeing the ideas?
Well, so when you think of something in your head, you like say it.
Yeah, exactly.
They probably can't do that.
But then there are people who are deaf who can speak.
Yeah.
So like I don't know.
It's a spectrum for sure.
Yeah. And then I also think it's super interesting that like even though we speak the same English language that like British people speak, ASL is different from the sign language over there.
Yeah.
And so like it's the same language, but yet in this like unspoken language, it's like almost two different things.
It kind of shows it developed differently.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't translated from English at all.
Yeah.
I liked it.
I like this one.
So probably
I'd say
a B.
B.
Yeah.
Personally.
I could take a B.
I like B.
All right.
I'm really saving S for something good.
Yeah.
That's what I'm afraid of.
All right. So the next one is bilingual personalities, which we did a discussion post about this one. And in my research for that, I learned of a term called frame shifting, which is, it's a phenomenon where someone who speaks multiple languages changes their personality based on which language they're speaking. So there was an example of someone who spoke English and Norwegian, and she felt that she was funnier when she spoke Norwegian because she could better communicate comedy, which was very interesting because I never would have thought that there would be a difference for it. And then there was another study where they showed women who spoke both English and Spanish an ad in those different languages. It was the exact same pictures, just different language. And they viewed the Spanish woman as being more confident, and they viewed the English woman as being more shy. So the only difference was language. So there's definitely, or it seems like there's a difference in how you perceive yourself based on the language you speak. So I thought that was very interesting because I never really would have expected that. And I think it probably comes from like cultural differences with the languages. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if I was speaking in Spanish as my second language, like I feel like in English I might make like a lot of puns or something, but Spanish as a second language I don't know as well, and I don't think I would have that ability.
That's true.
I'm in a Greek and Roman literature or mythology class right now, and there's been multiple times where the teacher goes, "This right here is a pun in Greek. It just can't be translated."
Yep.
Like the words. So that's part of the like humor in your own language is funnier. And then also when you were talking about the ads, it just reminded me of I don't speak Spanish, but I took the 2 courses in high school. So when I was in Mexico, a new movie came out, and I would see signs for it everywhere, and it always said nosotros, which means us in Spanish. But I didn't really make the connection, and then I came back and was really confused when I saw an ad for a movie called Us in the U.S. And I was like, and I kind of did look at like the character that was on the front page the same, dependent on the language. I couldn't tell you what those differences was, but in my mind there was a physical difference between like when it was in Spanish and when it was in English. But it was the same person, it was the same picture exactly. But I saw them, and seeing them like as a English speaker made them feel kind of more familiar.
I can speak Spanish, but I never get jokes in it because I'm too focused on understanding the language. So it's hard to realize there's comedy happening if you're just trying to figure out what someone's saying. You talked about jokes not being able to translate. There's a German joke that is only translatable to a man walked into a bar. That's it.
That's the joke.
It's in German. Apparently, it's funny, but they cannot translate it.
That's funny.
So yeah,
That's good.
All right, I like this one. I I like the ones that are kind of like international, kind of trans language community ones. I thought those were really interesting.
Yeah. It's kind of similar to language and perception, but less less morphinism.
Yeah.
I think we can go A. I'd put it A.
I'd definitely put it A. Maybe
Could jump to an
it
S.
could be the highest.
Okay, we put it A for now. We come back and pick
back.
one to elevate to S.
Yeah.
True.
Great.
We put it at the top, and we'll come back to it.
So, morphemes or morphology is so it's like this like mental grammar that you have going on in your head and how to split up words. And ever since we did the lesson, like the word that like I always think of when I think of morphology is like recyclable, like breaking it up into its three parts, recyclable. And so it just gives structure to words, and it's almost this innate structure that we have in our minds, even though sometimes we can be faked out by morphology. And so like corner can't be broken down because it does not derive from corn.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was like interesting when we were talking about the word frequency effect and the priming effect. Both prove that our minds think about words in broken down morphemes, and even something like corner and corn our brains associate as like a fake morpheme, and it still kind of works in the same way.
Yeah. I liked where it asked us to think, do you think of words in their whole form or in morphemes? Because I didn't really know at first. I had never thought of that, but
Yeah.
it's kind of both sometimes. It depends on the word for me. Like recyclable, I don't think of it in morphemes. But if you just add an ER onto a simple word, I'd probably think of that.
Building on that, I thought about it a lot, is recreation. Every time I see recreation, I'm like recreation, like making again. But that's not really what that word means. That word means to like have fun or like do a task.
Maybe it meant that at one point.
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe it stemmed from like, not Legos, but Legos, in the context of tearing down and rebuilding.
Maybe.
Rebuild, you're building again, but recreate is not. To recreate is just to enjoy, to have fun.
Yeah, that's weird. I think morphology wasn't that bad, but it was kind of like phonetics, where it's just pretty technical. I'd put it a high C above phonetics for sure.
I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, I can settle for high C.
All right.
Good drink. All right, and our last and final one, phonology. Right, so phonology, similar to, kind of similar to morphemes and phonetics both, it's how the sounds are organized in your mind. So not so much how the sounds are, it's kind of how you say them, and it's kind of how they're used in words, but it's more so how they're organized in your head. So, and this differs from language to language. So this was another one that I was talking about where it was like interlanguage ones. So like in Japanese, in their heads, or in English speakers' heads, we have S, and then we have SH, which is sh, but it's still like the S noise. Like if you think sh, you think of an S noise. But they actually have a separate character for that sound. So it's not the same character. And this shows up in other places where it's, to us, one sound, like the C, or C, K, and S all kind of can make the same, or C and K and C and S can at times make the same sound. But in other languages, that's not always the same. So going back to the Japanese one, they have a separate character for the sh form of S and the s form of S. So it's just kind of interesting to see how some sounds are reused between languages and some sounds are broken down into smaller sounds within different languages because, obviously you need a finite amount of characters. So it's interesting to see how those sounds are distributed to those characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought phonology was kind of fun and interesting, especially with like the Japanese example that you were talking about, is like what my mind immediately goes to when we think of discussing phonology, and just the fact that like in some languages we need that extra H, we need the extra characters, but like to them in Japanese it's just like this innate knowledge that like when the S is succeeded by the I, it's gonna make the SH sound.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting with we did an example of 3 words that Japanese just stole from English, but they modified them to fit their own phonology. So that was a really easy example of how our phonology is different from Japanese.
And that happens with a lot of other languages too, like in Spanish. I'm blanking right now, but I remember, or just the word no is used commonly. Like it's no is no in Spanish and English.
Yeah, or like pizza is pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, I guess Spanish steals restaurante. It's just restaurant with an E on the end of it.
Because a lot of the languages like come from the Latin root, so a lot of them have similar words. So it's just interesting how those words are used, and those sounds specifically are used in the languages.
Yeah.
I'd probably put this. I think it's definitely.
I think C moved phonetics to D.
I agree.
I
think phonology is more interesting than phonetics.
Oh,
yeah, for sure.
All right, we gotta pick one to move up to S.
So I guess we're just looking at the big 3 in A.
Yeah.
And I like all 3 of those.
Yeah.
I think not neurolinguistic methods. We can mark that one.
That was definitely the most scientific of the 3, and that's kind of what brought these 3 down, was that they're kind of the studies of, which is kind of what that one was.
Yeah. We seem to like the more conceptual kind of stuff.
Yeah. The stuff that we can see, really.
Yeah. So I kind of am partial to animal languages. If we're going by how interesting this might be to people, I feel like a lot of people are very interested in animals.
I think that would be a good hook. Like you're like, look at these cute animals. Don't you want to know how they communicate and how that relates to us? Exactly. Just communicate by dancing, don't you know?
Yeah. Animal languages and S.
Okay.
So that's our tier list. In S, we've got animal languages. A, we've got bilingual personalities and neurolinguistic methods. B, we've got language and perception. Wug, gonna frickin', sign language. In C, we've got phonology and morphemes. And in D, we've got phonetics. All right. Thank you for watching.